intuitively, like if you were just to poll like kids, right? They're going to say that they have free will. I think that that is just a very natural human intuition, and that's something that I don't want to throw out because we use like instinctual like appeals to instinct and intuition a lot in philosophy. And I think in the free will debate, it's something that people will say, well, yeah, but just because you feel that way doesn't mean it's good reason to believe that.
Yeah.
And it's like, but that's actually a really good reason to believe it. In my opinion, it's like, that's
definitely
kind of the basis of the consciousness argument too, is like we can't throw out this idea that we are conscious. And of course, it's a little bit different in the sense that like consciousness is how we actually experience anything. So yes, there's a distinction, but I still think like appealing to intuition there is, we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? But obviously it's like, okay, how when we understand like scientifically, psychologically, the ideas of genetics, DNA, family of origin, and whether it's stuff that like we have been born with that's like built into who we are, or the way that like different experiences in our life have shaped us, or even like other metaphysical things of like if we are destined for something, if something is fated, right? All of these different things that I do believe in. It's like, I think DNA is the easiest one to kind of go back to because we have proof that it does impact us and the way we behave and act and think. It's kind of like, okay, you can't dismiss that either. But in this middle ground view of compatibilism, that's like, okay, you don't have free will over what you will, but your will still impacts the world. That also kind of just feels like moving the goalposts to me. So
So you're not satisfied with that view?
I'm not. I don't, free will is one of the things normally I'm able to kind of like jerry-rig together a thought around like, okay, I can kind of make this make sense for myself. And even if someone else won't like this argument, it works within my worldview and what I hold to be true. Free will is like, I don't know if
it's a tricky one.
Yeah, it is. It is. So that's kind of where I've been with it, is like, I don't really like anything that's on the table, but I don't want to throw out my intuition that it exists. But also, I'm not going to throw away the science of, like, there are certain things that I can't control about myself, right?
Yeah. I agree with you there. And I want to kind of talk about the point you had about, oh my God, my ear is twitching so bad. It's so distracting. It sounds like there's a little bug in there and it's just
I hate that.
Flapping away. I don't know what's going on. But yeah, about the intuition thing, I feel like that's, personally, I feel like that's one of the main ways that philosophy is kind of led astray, is by kind of feeling like for whatever reason, our intuition about the way that we experience the world is wrong. It's like, that's kind of the whole point about intuition, is that's, you know, it's like, it's based on our experience in a way, you know, like with, in one of my term papers, I'm talking about this because Heidegger had a lifelong problem with Cartesian dualism and metaphysics and all that stuff. And he basically believed that the idea of a metaphysical subject, like a self-conscious knowing subject with, you know, rational intellect, was not the primary aim of philosophy was not to bridge the gap between the subject and the object, but that the subject was basically an invention of Western metaphysics. And because of that, this idea of the subject-object split, it's like a manufactured problem, essentially. And the weird thing about that is that intuitively, all of my experiences are of me experiencing something, you know?
Right.
They're necessarily subjective. So I can't imagine experiencing the world in a way that wasn't dualistic, in the sense that I experienced myself as like the center, like the you know, like the nucleus of my experience, and I perceive an external world. Maybe in a different universe, human beings could have another sort of like self-concept, but I think we can say that like metaphysical dualism, we don't like that, but that doesn't mean that we have to somehow work our way around or reject the fact that our experience is dualistic in a way, you know?
I think that's a really, really good point, that like what you said in the very beginning of it's something that leads philosophy astray, I think is so true, because oftentimes I think we get kind of, and when I say we, I'm kind of talking about like academia as a whole and like philosophers and that body. We get kind of led astray by purely basing things on like logic and reason. But even then, like there are holes and gaps in how logic and reason works, because that relies on like an inherent belief in the rational, in our ability to ration, which is still appealing to our consciousness, our experience, our intuition to some extent. And so it's like there is no unmoved mover there, except for, in my opinion, I think, therefore I am. It's like, that is kind of something that I continually go back to, that is like, okay, when we're talking about the subject-object split, it always leads back to Descartes and this idea.
That troublemaker.
That stinker.
That stinker. Descartes was such a stinker.
Little stinker. But it's like that really is the only thing that we have any proof of, that we can prove at all. And then he decides to put everything back in his belief system because he adds God into the picture, and it's like, whoa. And that's kind of where I get off board with Descartes. But I do think that first intuition is so important, that it's like the only, like you were saying, you can only experience life, you can only come to know anything through the lens of yourself. And that has to privilege that our intuition and our experience counts for not just something, but kind of everything.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think, well, with Descartes, the idea is like, that's the baseline. And so it's like I think it's right to say it's a sort of transcendental argument, where he's starting with this, I think, therefore I am, is like the basis of all subsequent truth claims, you know? Which kind of makes his objectivity inherently subjective, but that's another thing. But you can also use the baseline assumption of our intuition, that I think, therefore I am, or, you know, in other words, like that I am a subject with a sort of subjective experience of things, and say like, okay, this is our intuition, so what else must be true given that this is our intuition? I don't know. That's a whole nother can of worms, but I think on a completely different note, and related to something that you said, I think like another thing that leads philosophy astray, it's not just the tendency to feel like there's something beyond our intuition or actual lived experience of the way that things are that we have to convey, and like that's the more real reality. I think that leads us astray. And then on top of that, also somehow the opposite of that, like the rejection of Cartesian dualism isn't in and of itself a new framework. Like the rejection of something is not something else. It's just the negation of that. So it's still operating within that same framework. It's still limiting itself within that dualistic view. Right. Like counterculture is still responding to the culture. Yeah, exactly. So that's when it becomes difficult, because I'm like, okay, if we want a completely different, like non-dualistic framework, then would the basis of would we have to identify a different basis like a different foundation of all of our experience. I don't know. That has nothing to do with free will.
No, I think it kind of, it gets to the root of why I think it's so uncomfortable. Because it's like, it does call into question our lived experience. And it's like, it feels so wrong to say that we don't have free will, because it's like, I decide things all the time with this subject-object split, that it's like, it kind of means that like anything objective has to be subjective to a certain extent. And it's like, yeah, it does, because there's no way for us to prove that we are experiencing something the same way. Obviously, there's like ways that we know we all see blue in a similar way, but that's kind of the evergreen question there, is like, do we all see colors? But
what if my blue is actually your red?
Right. Right. But I think there's this interesting flip with like, well, what if everything subjective is actually objective? Like, what if we flip it the other way? Because it's like, the only objectivity that I can ever have is Reese's objectivity. And for so it's like, if that's what you have to go on, that's what you have to go on. I do wonder if there's any way that we can undo this idea of dualism that we have kind of inherited. Like, if we wanted to, because I was thinking about this. Wow, we are going down a different avenue, but this is actually something I have really been fascinated by, so I want to keep chasing it down, actually.
Let's do it.
I think it's great.
Let's do it.
In this kind of consciousness thing, one thing that I've been thinking a lot about is panpsychism, and how they kind of take the like mind-body problem, subject-object split, and say, yeah, well, instead of like rooting everything in materialism, that like privileging that as more real than our experience, privilege consciousness, the only thing we actually know, as the realist thing, and then map materialism as the thing that arises out of consciousness. And there is something that, even though that's framed as like a wackadoodle theory in philosophy, that makes so much more sense to me about that than so many other philosophies of mind. But I'm like, even then, with what you said just a little bit ago, is there something else that's even like, that still relies upon the mind-body dualism problem, right?
Yeah.
It's just flipping it, as opposed to saying like, okay, what if that actually wasn't an issue? What if mind-body dualism isn't a problem?
Yeah, what if we're just trying so hard to like be different than Descartes, but really it's like, you know, like sometimes I feel like people try so hard to escape a certain tradition of thought that they end up like in a roundabout way just ending right back in it by positing all sort of weird, unnecessary stuff just because there's this weird aura around dualism where it's like, oh, it's bad. But I do like the idea of starting out with a unity. Panpsychism, I feel like if you have this assumption or intuition of our existence as a sort of like self-positing, self-referential thing, that you have to have consciousness on the basis of which such positing occurs. Yeah. But isn't panpsychism like sort of a metaphysical account, right? Like it's kind of like there's like little bits and bobs of like consciousness, just like, ooh, in a psychedelic way, actually, I do like that.
Right?
Everything is everything. I like that.
Yeah, there is something really, really intuitive about it to me, that it's like, okay, if we are going to grant mind-body dualism to begin with, that I think is kind of the tack that I would have to take.